Hello, how's it going?
Hey, hey.
Welcome. This is Taku Hirano. Welcome to Clif Chats. My name's Clifford, and I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm a percussionist educator. And Clif Chats is a chance to talk with great artists such as Taku. Uh, Taku is in LA now. I believe you recently moved from New York to back to LA, which I would love to hear about that change.
Yep.
Taku has played the people that Taku has played with is the list is large. I'm going to say some of the names which many of you will recognize: Fleetwood Mac, Whitney Houston, John Mayer, Bette Midler, Stevie Nicks, Lionel Richie, Isaac Hayes, Dr. John, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Beyonce, Lady Gaga, Annie Lennox, Herbie Hancock, Steven Tyler, Usher, Pharrell, Shakira, Miley Cyrus, Ed Sheeran, Smokey Robinson, Willie Nelson, Mary J. Blige, Ariana Grande, I'm saying her name wrong, Patti LaBelle, Melissa Etheridge, John Legend, Leanne Rimes, Shaka Khan, Keith Urban, Jennifer Hudson, Blue Man Group, and so many others. It's an amazing list of artists that you've played with. And welcome, thank you so much for joining me on Cliff Chats.
Yeah. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll keep my eyes on if people have any questions or comments. Please feel free to put them in. Uh, so you're originally from Southern California, is that correct?
I was born in Osaka, Japan, and I moved to the States when I was like about 3 months old. My
Oh,
father
okay,
had a business transfer, and I grew up in Fresno, California, in the Central Valley, kind of
okay,
in the valley just below Yosemite
uh
is
huh.
the easiest way
And,
to tell people.
and then you spent some time also in Hong Kong as well. Is that correct?
Yes. So same, it's kind of the same reason why I came to the States. My father's business transfer brought our family to Hong Kong. We went there for 4 years. And so I spent middle school and half of high school, seventh through 10th grade in Hong Kong.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some formative years. And so I would love to talk. One of the things I'd love to touch on is just the different places you've lived and how that's affected, or how that's influenced you. And also, about your skill set and how you've added to your skill set, teaching and how that's become or been a part of what you do. Obviously, your different influences, your different teachers, such as Giovanni Hidalgo, living in New York City, writing for film or playing for film, what that process can be like. Advice for beginners, so we have a lot of different things we can talk about. Advice for professionals, all of those things.
Sure.
One thing that is different for percussion is, so well, one thing is, so you also do play drum set, is that correct?
I haven't in years, and I don't make that as my main vocation, main instrument. So it's
Did you
not my
ever
bread
aspire
and butter.
to?
Um, I mean, I started out on drum set quite early. I started out at the same time as starting out in classical percussion. At age 9, I started playing drum set,
uh
all the way through to entering Berklee College of Music for drum set. But
okay.
along the way, I also started learning hand percussion. I kind of gravitated towards that.
And when did you first start playing with your hands as opposed to
Hand
sticks?
percussion was around 11th grade, right when I moved back to California from Hong Kong. The School of the Arts I went to in Fresno, California had a really strong Latin jazz program. So I
Okay.
started learning Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Cuban hand percussion starting in 11th grade.
Okay. Where did you do, so you're playing in different ensembles, and was there ever a batucada or anything like that?
We not a formal batucada, but we learned some of the batucada instruments. So that's when I first started learning everything from pandero to surdo, hepenique. Just everything in the batucada batteria. You know,
Okay. Because one
yeah,
thing that really impresses me about you is it seems like you're well versed in so many different culturally specific uh, traditions.
yeah.
And so I'd love to talk about the process. I also as well played drums, or started on drum set and still do play drum set, but also gravitated towards hand drumming. And for me, mostly studying West African drumming, having done a little bit of Afro Cuban and
Yeah.
a little bit of Brazilian. But I'm just curious, like, for and this is where it could really apply to beginners, or really to anyone who really is really, working on improving their sound and that sort of thing. I know for myself, the sound on, playing with your hands is a process where, um, it just seems like an endless process.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious what has been your process and steps, or steps forward and then steps backwards that you've taken as you've been learning, to get a nice sound out of the instrument. And it could be any of the instruments that you play with your hands, but I'm just curious what,
Sure.
thinking back to that process, what that looked like.
I mean, early on, so right when I started playing and learning Afro Cuban percussion, even just getting a conga slap,
Mm-hmm.
that's still, something that you have to keep sharpening your tones and keep it up. I mean, even today, like to this day, I get rusty, and so I have to do. It's almost like a horn player with long tones, that
I say the exact same thing. That's great to
you
hear you say that.
yeah. So I do have basic tone exercises even on tour where I warm up with those, just tone production, and moving quickly and accurately between different tones and different hand positionings and stuff like that. So it still goes on to this day, but I started when I started learning tones and really working on it and trying to figure out the mechanics of it starting in 11th grade.
Uh,
And then by the time I got to college 2 years later, Berklee College of Music, in order to make a little side money, I started teaching just privately, just putting up flyers, on the bulletin board. And
mm.
I got a couple of students. And so that's when it really reinforced me what my concept was of the mechanics of creating different tones, because I then had to explain what worked, so far for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I was listening to a podcast that you were on, where you were talking about being at Berklee and they're not really being a percussion major yet, and
Right.
also Giovanni being there, Giovanni Hidalgo, who one of the great, if not a lot of people would say the greatest
Yeah.
conga player in the world, which is very fortuitous for a percussion player. So like, what was your learning process like what, and also what are some different, you it sounds like you spent a lot of time, or whatever time you could, with Giovanni, and what else did you do? Did you do like the African ensembles there, or what else did you do when you were at Berklee?
When I was there weren't really any African ensembles. I know that part-time or in and out, Joe Galeota was teaching some West African percussion there.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was just Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Cuban. And like you had mentioned, when I applied to Berklee, the three percussion-related majors were drum set, jazz vibraphone, concert percussion.
Uh-huh.
I knew I didn't want to do classical percussion. I'd been from grade school, definitely through middle school in Hong Kong. I was really studying classical percussion intensely. I was studying with the principal timpanist of the Hong Kong Philharmonic for those
Mm-hmm.
4 years I was in Hong Kong, and or the assistant principal for 2 years, and then the principal timpanist. So the whole idea was for me to get into Juilliard, and I just was just like kind of burnt out on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to California. That's when I started taking up hand percussion, getting back into playing drum set and jazz and playing in the jazz band and whatnot. So all that to say that I knew I didn't want to enter Berklee as a concert percussionist. I had no background in jazz vibraphone at all. So, and I played some drum set,
Mm-hmm.
since age 9, since 5th grade. So that's what I auditioned on, was drum set. I would say I was a mediocre, okay. I wasn't even the best drum set player in my high school in Fresno, California,
Uh-huh.
but I was able to get in. And then I brought my timbales, bongos, congas, and pandero and what other small percussion with me, along with my drum set, to the dorms at Berklee when I entered. So any percussion was kind of extracurricular when I first got to Berklee. There were some electives to take, but after my first semester um, at Berklee, that's when they started offering Afro-Cuban percussion, not ensembles, but like a group class, like a lab. And I saw that it was going to be taught by Giovanni Hidalgo, because he was hired by Berklee at the start of my spring semester, at the start of my second semester. So I studied with Giovanni basically for 4 years,
Uh-huh.
from
And
my second
was it
semester.
like he would come for a certain amount of time, then he'd be gone, and then come? Was it a lot of like?
Yeah. I think he would teach maybe 3 days or something out of the week. And
Mm,
he would kind of have a rotating class schedule. He'd probably teach the same exact class to like 3 times in a row, which was like a, you know, percussion Afro Cuban one. And so I used up all of my credits as far as what do you call them, elective credits, just to take as many classes as I could. And then after 2 years of that, halfway through college was when Berklee offered hand percussion as a principal instrument. So I switched principal instruments halfway through college. And then basically they're still trying to roll out and figure out what the curriculum was going to be. So as they started creating classes, core classes for the curriculum, I was just taking them. And so my main 2 teachers were Giovanni and Jamie Haddad. With Jamie, I was studying all the Middle Eastern and South Indian stuff, most on frame drums.
Mostly on frame. Okay. Well, it's funny that classical percussion seems about as far as you can go from some of the different cultural traditions that you ended up, you know, getting into.
Yeah, but you know, having the classical background really helped because writing out percussion parts on the fly was that, you know, that skill set that I had even at that age, starting at like 17 or 18 when I entered Berklee. You know, Giovanni was not a person who would like walk in a class with handouts. He would just kind of sit down and be like, okay, play this. And you couldn't figure out what it was. And he's playing over 3 or 4 drums. And I would just pull out my pen and you know, staff notation paper and just write it out as quickly as I could. And I got really fast at it. And also deciphering, because he's left-handed, so I would have to switch everything around as well. So I got really fast at just sight transcribing. And I think a lot of that was just from all the pedagogy and everything that I had, you know, experienced up until then.
Yeah. So, and I would think that skill set also being doing, you know, working on reading and working on classical percussion for so long must have really given you a great skill set for your gig, you know, your professional gigs, I would think.
Definitely. I think that same thing. I mean, even nowadays, especially if I'm working not necessarily on a tour, but maybe a television show where you have very limited time and you have to catch figures and this and that, the other. And sometimes a lot of times the charts aren't right, or we're, you know, cutting them up and adding hits and this and that, the other, that I can, you know, write and transcribe stuff very quickly.
Yeah. That's great. And so being in class with Giovanni Hidalgo, you said you're notating him playing. What did he ever spend time on technique, or was it more just like in the moment playing?
It was actually a lot of technique, because he has such a distinct style of playing that you had to get in your hands a decent amount of the technical aspect, a lot of the heel toe motion stuff and moving in between drums. So he would walk in the door and, you know, each day would do quite a good amount of drills, especially in the private lessons. You know, in the group classes, I mean, if you had a class of 15 people and some of them were, you know, and it was an elective class, some were drummers, some were not. So in those cases, you know, if he wants to break down a groove and say, oh, today we're gonna learn comparsa, and then he would say, you know, this drum plays this drum plays this, and it would take some of the students a lot longer than me to figure it out. So by then I could transcribe it. That's not a problem. But when it was especially one-on-one, where he just like, play this, you know, so I try to play it, and then when he's talking or, you know, whatever, like, or explaining it or showing it to me slowly, like I just write it down as quickly as I could. So
and did you record those classes?
I recorded them. I have binders of transcriptions. I don't think I have some audio recordings. I honestly don't think I even had like, I don't think I even had like a tape recorder really.
Okay.
During that time.
Yeah.
So
I met Giovanni once, and I've admired him, you know, as long as I've played percussion. And I met him, and he was just such a sweet guy. And he wrote down his number, and like, you know, said, and here's my manager's number. He's like, if you ever want to bring me up here, I'd be happy to come. I was only in Portland, Oregon at the time. And he said, you know, I told him my teacher one of my main teachers is Mamadi Keita from Guinea, West Africa, and he said, "Oh,
Sure.
he's my friend," you know. But
Yeah.
it's so cool to see the love, you know, two great percussionists, and I know it goes both ways.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. So you were studying, you know, Afro Cuban, Afro Puerto Rican music with Giovanni, and then
Yeah.
also studying Indian music.
Yeah, I would say more Indian concepts, rhythmic concepts, more
Uh,
than I can't profess to be like really that adept at Indian percussion
uh,
and Indian music
well,
until later
that's
on.
a world in itself too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I got my feet wet definitely with Jamie Haddad in those last 2 years of college. And then also just from a technique standpoint, like a couple different styles of frame drumming, you know, just because he uses a split finger, like mridangam technique from
Okay.
South India. And then I studied a little bit with Glenn Velez and between Glenn and Jamie, like I was able to learn like some of the more full finger, full hand techniques like that you would play on a rick or like two-handed frame drumming.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then I went to Cal Arts upon graduating from Berkeley, where I studied with John Bergamo, and so he uses a whole different type of frame drumming
Okay.
approach because he does a more of a North Indian tabla technique where he puts the frame drum between his legs, and so he's playing it more like a tabla
Okay.
downwards. So you know, I can't say I'm great at any of the three, but like I'm able to jump between different techniques.
Yeah. Have you found that learning the different techniques has helped with like did the learning the techniques of the Indian concepts influence or help your technique, your conga technique?
Yeah, I think so. Um, at least in terms of creativity and whatnot, and also just having a strong rhythmic foundation, and also like normalizing playing in odd meters, you know.
Uh,
So
yeah.
yeah, no, definitely. So because
And
if I'm used to vocalizing or playing grooves on a frame drum in 5, then playing it all of a sudden if I have to play some grooves in 5 on congas, it's not like I'm not sitting there counting. I'm actually just going by feel because I know kind of, you know, I can replicate in my head what I would be doing on the frame drum on other instruments.
you've internalized those
Yeah,
feels.
yeah.
And so with a lot of the gigs that you have done, are you what percentage of the time are you creating parts?
I mean, I think most of the time I'm creating parts,
Mm.
unless I'm in. Well, yeah, I would say most of the time, especially in pop music, rock music. There's not really anybody that will be an authority to say this is what you're going to play. If it's more of a Broadway situation, or you know, a pit percussion situation where there's specific parts that need to be played and you have to hit these certain things, then definitely. Or if I'm on doing a TV gig or an award show where we have very orchestrated arrangements. But even in that case, it's really just about like making sure you hit certain specific key elements at a certain time, and otherwise you're just kind of making up parts or grooving or laying out or whatnot that you feel yourself is best for the music.
Okay. And
Yeah.
what would you recommend for either people just getting started playing with their hands, playing polyrhythmic music of whatever, you know, whatever culturally specific type of music it is, or experienced musicians who, you know, want to learn more about polyrhythms and hearing different parts? What are some tips for getting started and getting, you
Hmm.
know, dealing with that?
I think the best thing is just internalizing. So a lot of that has to be listening. So, you know, I would spend a lot of time listening, even if you don't really understand it. Like, I mean, I knew nothing of Indian music, and it blew my mind the first time I bought a CD with Zakir Hussain. And then, you know, there's a piece, a tabla um, duet with tabla and a bowed instrument, sarangi, and it's like it's in Japtal. And I'm like, well, what's Japtal? And then you figure out it's like, oh, it's, you know, it's an 11. And then all of a sudden you start counting, and so I just kept playing that one thing over and over and over again, and just listening and starting to internalize and normalize it in my head. I think that's how I got into it on my end. I say just like listen as much as possible,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, in the beginning, probably possibly even more than playing is for stuff that's not familiar to you.
Yeah.
You
It's a
know, or
good
else
thing
you're
if you
just wasting your time on the drum. You don't, you know, unless you're hooked up with a really great teacher who's a master that can really, you know, focus you in the right direction.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you get an earworm, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah,
I was yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Cuz then you're starting to internalize it. Uh so your first gig outside the United States and first big gig was with Whitney Houston, is that right?
My well, my first major
Or
world
major,
tour,
yeah.
yeah, was with Whitney Houston. Yeah. I'd worked with other artists prior to her. Right before her, I was with Isaac Hayes.
Oh, okay.
And before him, I was with, well, I started out when I got to LA after Berkeley and enrolled at Cal Arts. The first artist I worked with was an R&B artist named Tevin Campbell, who was being
Uh-huh.
produced by Quincy Jones.
Okay.
And then did a small tour with him, went overseas,
Did you
and
get to
then
work with Quincy Jones at that point?
no,
Uh-huh.
no. and then another R&B artist named Kenny Lattimore, who was on Sony, and then you know we traveled quite a bit with him. But yeah, and then it was Isaac Hayes and then Whitney. So with small gigs here and there and one-offs with different artists in between. So all that to say, Whitney was definitely like my first gigantic world tour, full production, tour buses, traveling across Europe for 4 months and doing a full North American tour, you know,
Uh-huh. Was
video
that
screens, dancers, all that stuff.
was that overwhelming? Did you feel comfortable with it?
It was all, I won't say it was overwhelming. That's what I wanted to do. You know,
Uh-huh.
even sitting in the dorms at Berkeley or in the practice rooms, like that was one of my goals, was to be on a major tour and
Mm.
be able to experience that, you know. So that's what I trained towards in a way.
Yeah.
That's what I visualized. So I won't say it was overwhelming. I was definitely, there's a lot of gratitude every time I, you know, sat back even on stage and so like, wow, you know, like this is the beginning of it.
Uh-huh.
So, but overwhelming, I was just trying to take it in that
Yeah.
sense, overwhelming that everything was so new that like there's a lot of things I probably don't remember, but I was just trying to assimilate as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so as far as placing from there, from well, I guess from that a few questions from that point, did it lead? Has it just basically led from one gig to another when you play with the artists with that sort of stature?
Kind of. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Because
Before that, how did you piece things together? You know, earlier on, like, and put yourself in the place and be someone that people counted on and also wanted to be around. What are some strategies that you had?
well, the first strategy was move to LA.
Uh-huh.
No, everyone graduating from Berkeley, not to say everybody, but a lot of the my peers, it was like you're either going to move to LA or New York.
Mm-hmm.
And a few friends moved to Nashville. But basically it was like all my friends that were mainly in kind of the jazz world ended up in New York. And then a lot of guys who wanted to get really into recording and touring, they eventually moved to LA. So I already knew that having lived a lot of my life in California, I was ready to move back west, have a little nicer weather, a
Uh-huh.
little more laid back,
Yeah.
you know. And I had done my fair share of gigging, driving down from Boston down to New York and playing clubs and this and that. And it was a schlep,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with a carload of gear in the snow with people honking at you trying to load in. And I was just kind of like, that's not really what I would rather rough it in LA than New York.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of my thing. And then I had to figure out a way to get there, which was enroll in grad school so that
Uh-huh.
I would be able to get out there. So what I tell a lot of people, like they always ask me, "Oh, I want to do what you do." So how do I get auditions? How do I do this and that? I've only had maybe 2 auditions in my life, in my entire career. Everything's word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is get to a city where what you want to do is happening. It's on and popping and there's a scene. For me, that was LA because there's recording, there's touring. And in the meantime, at the very worst, I can do what I was doing in Boston, which was playing club gigs and playing weddings and, doing this and that. So I'd figured, well, I'm going to give myself 2 years. I can get my master's degree in that amount of time and hit the scene as hard as I can, have as many local musicians on the scene, know who I am in those 2 years. And at the very worst, I could just be doing what I'm just doing here in Boston,
Yeah.
and so that's the attitude I took. And so to answer your question, what was I doing in between big jobs was little jobs,
Yeah. And,
just keeping afloat around town and making sure that and if I wasn't working, then I was still networking.
you were
If I was
out
free,
and about and
yeah,
meeting people
as
and seeing friends and stuff.
much as possible. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Uh, and so, but you found even in Boston that there was enough demand for percussionists to work. I mean,
No,
as far as not playing drum set.
not really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I saved money for 1 year after graduating to move to California. In that year, especially, like I was really hustling. So I was playing percussion for dance classes at Boston University. I was playing around town, and I do the odd wedding here and there with some different top 40 groups, playing weddings in Connecticut and Maine and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just this and that,
Okay. And what has been your experience with West African drumming?
West African drumming, I didn't really know or study too much of it until I got to Cal Arts.
Okay.
And as part of the world percussion or world music degree, you had to study West African. You had to basically go into pick two of the three main departments they had at that point in time, which was either Balinese and Javanese gamelan orchestra or West African percussion, drumming and dance, or Indian percussion, mainly North Indian, but some South Indian. So I knew I was going there mainly to study Indian percussion, but then the secondary was just take a bunch of courses in West African percussion. So
okay, and who was the teacher, or what part of Africa was it?
It was Ghanaian, and the two teachers were Alfred and Kobla Ladzekbo.
Okay, yeah.
Yep, and they
Yeah.
were the two teachers teaching there. So
I've heard their names before.
yeah, yeah. I have not retained any of that stuff though. Like I have all my notes from it, but it's all completely ensemble based, so there's not really any way for me to practice and keep that stuff up.
Yeah.
So
No, I can relate. I my first experience with West African drumming was Ghanaian drumming,
yeah.
and it's not been what I've studied for many years, and I still remember stuff because I did it for a while, but I know it's just like it's hard to remember everything when there's just so much information. And
No, definitely. And then I do have, since high school, I have one of my mentors. He's based out of St. Louis, and he plays a lot of West African percussion. So he would always, you know, um, show me bits and pieces, in terms of techniques and, whether that be Senegalese or Ghanaian or whatnot. So
okay, he you said he's based in St. Louis?
yes, yeah, his
Okay.
name's Craig Williams, and he taught at the United States Percussion Camp, and that's where I would go to every summer. And so I would study with him and keep in touch with him throughout college. And so
Oh,
he
cool.
always gave me great tidbits of knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And
Yeah.
so some of the different people you've played with, what how did some of the gigs come about? I guess you said one gig kind of leads to another.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that, and also just some of the great drummers you played with, like Steve Jordan, and just like what is it you look for in a drummer? What makes a drummer easy to play with as a percussionist, and how do you think they have that sensibility? I know that's a few different things,
Yeah.
but yeah, if we could talk about drummers, I'd love to. As someone who plays drum set and percussion, what is it you look for in drummers? And
Okay.
yeah,
Drummers. I guess just my favorite drummers to play with have a concept of what I'm doing, so they're not just I play with some drummers that they're just gonna they go, well, you just play what you're gonna play. I'm gonna play what I'm gonna play. So I guess you just fit in where you fit
so
in.
you have to fit in with what they're doing. Is it? Oops, we lost Taku for a second. Hopefully, he comes back. For people who are just checking out, this is Clif Chats. Checking us out, this is Clif Chats. My name is Clifford Kaufman, and I'm talking to Taku Hirano, who is a first call percussionist based out of LA. Taku has played with Fleetwood Mac, Whitney Houston, John Mayer, Bette Midler, Stevie Nicks, Lionel Richie, Isaac Hayes, Dr. John, Stevie Winwood, Aretha Franklin, Beyonce, Lady Gaga, Aretha Franklin, I already said that. Herbie Hancock, Steven Tyler, Usher, Pharrell, Shakira, Miley Cyrus, Ed Sheeran, Smokey Robinson's, and I just lost him. Hope up there, he's back. You're back.
I don't know.
I was just reintroducing you.
Oh, okay. My wife, like, I was just talking. Okay, so drummers, like, yeah, it just depends on the best drummers I enjoy playing with are the ones who, like, we suss everything out, you know.
Like, talk about it, or
yeah, definitely. Whether it's in tour rehearsals or whether we're rehearsing for a TV show, you know, like we're in the house band for the Grammy Awards or something like that. That's like, oh, I'm going to cover this, you know, and you know, it's like, oh, well, I can't cover this cymbal swell, so can you cover it, you know, or something like that. So, like, yeah, so there's a lot of that, just like, because there's so much interplay, you know. I enjoy being an extension of the drummer. So all that to say is, like, the best drummers I get along with are the ones that I have the most communication with.
And do a lot of them, do you think they have some experience with percussion, or what is it about what they do that makes it easy to play with them?
Yeah, usually, like, I would say usually most of the drummers I play with are drummers that are used to playing with percussionists. Because those drummers are usually on gigs where there are percussionists, whether it's me or one of my peers. You know, so yeah, I mean, there are times where I work with drummers who are not used to playing with a percussionist, but, you know, at that point, if I know that, then I'll really be keep the communication really open. Like, this is when I'm going to play on this song, or do you know, what do you think, or, you know, XYZ. Like, are you going to cover the hand claps, or are you playing an acoustic snare? If so, then I'll cover the claps and some of the other samples from the album or whatever, you know.
So on a lot of the big gigs that you're doing, are you often playing the album exactly as it is in the album? Like, you're really replicating the album? How much freedom do you have?
It depends on the gig. It depends on the artist. You know, so, and it totally depends on the setting, obviously. But yeah, if you're working with a major pop star and we're going to play the Tonight Show, then it's got to sound like the album.
Yeah.
You know.
So we got a few comments.
Okay.
Asaku says Taku.
Oh, hey.
What's up? Brenda Meyer says, hi, Taku. I finally got on. And also Asaku says, curious to know your thoughts, Taku's thoughts on the balance between studying and working. Must be hard to continue studying and growing while working so much.
Oh, definitely. First of all, shout out to Brenda Myers. She was my first percussion teacher in Fresno. Yeah. Yes. And she's in Fresno still teaching, and has gone on to lead these great percussion ensembles of, I won't say kids, because I think the age range runs from grade school through high school. But her youth percussion ensembles in Fresno, it's called We Got the Beat, and they're fantastic. Nice. It's amazing. So shout out to Brenda, because I think I'm in the first generation of Brenda's kids.
So people check out Brenda Myers and
Brenda's We Got the Beat. Yep.
We Got the Beat. Nice. I'll check that out.
Yeah. And a good person for you to interview too, actually.
Okay.
Just
Brenda, I'd love to talk with you.
Conceptually, as far as working with students, she's great. Isaku, yes. And Isaku, by the way, is an amazing percussionist. He's a taiko player, Japanese taiko.
Nice.
Yep. And went to Berkeley. We met at Berkeley when he was just finishing up at Berkeley College of Music as the institutions and the department's only percussion principal whose principal instrument was taiko. And so he was able to do kind of a customized curriculum. So he's definitely a trailblazer, and he's in LA now doing
Okay.
great things with taiko drumming.
And
Uh,
for just for anyone who's not familiar with taiko drumming, it's drumming, I believe, from Japan,
yes,
and there's some huge drums and some different sized drums, but it's beautiful to watch and listen to because there's such big movements and it can almost be like dance, or it seems almost dance like at times.
definitely. And it's almost like, and it's a drum orchestra, like a batucada, like a Brazilian samba. You know, the drum ranges and voices and roles within the ensemble are so varied. It's very,
Uh-huh.
but it's okay. So getting back to Isaku's question, the balance is really hard, especially when you're on the road. Like, you know, like you would think that, oh, you have so much downtime on the road, you don't even have to deal with like the druthers of everyday living of, you know, picking up your dry cleaning and going to the grocery store and this, that, the other, because you're in a hotel and you're jet setting to different cities. And then apart from your 2 hours on stage, you're free.
Mm.
But there's very, in it's so taxing, like you end up spending a lot of time just kind of either resting or resting your mind. So it is difficult to keep up in each type of studying. So that being said, I feel like I only really get time to really study formally when I'm off the road and I can kind of decompress. Now, that doesn't mean I ever stop learning, but a lot of times that's in the form of uh, researching, just looking at, you know, new stuff on YouTube or listening to music and talking to your peers and learning, you know, like, oh, you should check this out. I should check this out, or you know, whatnot. So um, I think that, and I fashion myself as a professional student, you know, but in that same way, it is very difficult to find that balance. It really is. So
So when you're off the road would be when you would study more.
yes, in fact, I basically consider studying my hobby and then playing my vocation.
Nice.
Yeah.
And regarding being on the road and all the road work that you've done, how do you stay healthy on the road, and how do you mentally, psychologically, mentally, and also physically?
Yeah. That's really hard, you know, especially with hand percussion being such a physical instrument. And then just traveling takes it out of you, whether you're on a tour bus and, you know, waking up or not going to sleep at really odd hours. It's really tough. But, you know, so it's having a good regimen of working out, eating right, you know, combating whatever wear and tear that's happening on your system. Meaning,
Mhm.
like, for me, it's a lot of stretching, a lot of yoga when I'm on the road, in addition to cardio and strength training. And because percussion is so physical, like I have to figure out, no matter, like if I have 2 days off, then I can carve out one day of rest, one day of working out, and then I have a show, you know, and that kind of thing. So I really have to kind of plan out those types of things. I can't do certain um, strength training on certain muscle groupings on show days, because then I'll be, you know, my arms will be dead like in time
Mhm.
for a show or something like that. So I also, it takes a lot of thought and a lot of scheduling, actually.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's really interesting. And
yeah.
and what does healthy eating look like for you?
Um, I would just say, I'm not like hardcore or anything, like, you know, as far as I'm not a vegan or anything by any means. I did find that being plant based on the road actually gives me more energy, though. I watched that documentary on Netflix called Game Changers, and that
Ah,
was fantastic. Where it's talking about just the physiological aspects of how much eating animal protein kind of clogs you up and slows you down.
yeah.
And so I tried that on the last Fleetwood Mac tour, where I went plant based on a day before a show and then on a show day. So basically, I'll make sure to be completely plant based for at least 24 hours before I hit the stage. And it made a huge difference. Like
That's
my stamina
interesting.
was like shot through the roof.
Wow,
So
that's really interesting. I
yeah,
that's something I try to eat plant based as much as possible, and I've noticed I felt when I was fully eating that way, I had more energy. I was hungry all the time, but I had more energy too. And
I've done that in the last, you know, on the last tour, I did that just because it was so physically taxing, and that really helped. But other than that, it's just just being cognizant of just feeding the machine,
Uh,
so my intake of carbs probably goes up on the road just because I'm just working that much harder than I am if I'm at home and fairly sedentary.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit of a turnaround, and I still would like to talk about some of the different artists you play with. But
Okay.
what is your New Orleans connection?
My New Orleans connection, first and foremost, like I've always loved that city.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think my father loves jazz, Dixieland jazz, all things New Orleans music. So when we moved to America, I believe the first family vacation we ever took was to New Orleans, or at least one of first big trips our family took.
Uh,
So I was probably like 5, maybe, when I first went there. So it always had like a special place in my heart. And then I met my wife there. You know, I was on tour with Isaac Hayes, and we played the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. And my wife, she comes from a storied, famous musical family in New Orleans, the Neville family.
the Nevilles, yeah.
Yeah. So her father, my father-in-law, is the eldest Neville brother, Art Neville, and he founded the Hawkettes, then he founded the Meters, and then he founded the Neville brothers with his brothers.
That's quite a musical family that you married into.
Yes,
yeah.
no, definitely. So now, we have a home in New Orleans as well. So
Oh, you do? Okay.
so that's home. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, New Orleans has a special place in my heart as well. Just my brother lived there for a while, and man,
Oh yeah.
it's a rich city,
Definitely.
culturally. So you met your wife there, and then you've lived in some different places, and your wife is a reporter.
Yes, she's a news anchor. And when we met, she was living in New York. I was living in LA. She was home visiting.
Okay.
And then we were bi-coastal for a while. And then when we got married, then we lived in LA together. And then we lived in Atlanta. She had a show on CNN, so we had to move to Atlanta. Then we moved back to LA. And then we moved to New York. And so we've been in New York for the last 10 years for her work. And then since the pandemic, we moved back to LA. So
yeah. So you did end up in New York for a while, because you were saying, LA sounded good because, the sunshine and all that. And
I love New York. I absolutely love New York. And I think, and then especially, I lived in New York for over 10 years, from early 2010 till this past summer. So, and all my work is still based in LA. So I never felt like I missed LA because I would be in LA so much. So I was able to enjoy New York for all the great things that New York is, and not have to really be a struggling musician in New York. I could actually just be, enjoy New York when I was off the road.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so the different places you've lived, how have they influenced you?
Yeah, it's really hard to say, because I feel like, New York is the one place now that I've lived for over a decade, up until recently, and nothing really changed too much in terms of me musically, because all of my work was for the most part outside of New York.
Were you doing gigs in New York or exploring musically?
Yeah, because I still had a lot of friends in New York that I went to college with and whatnot. And also from certain gigs that I've done where like a good portion of the touring band lived in New York. So I got to New York with a lot of friends there. Like Bette Midler, a lot of Bette's band was in New York.
Okay.
Or at least half of them.
Yeah.
So how's it influenced me? I don't know. I would have to, I guess, ask me that like in a few years, and I can kind of look back, but
sure.
LA is where I built my career. Atlanta, I lived there for 2 years, but I was on the road with Fleetwood Mac the entire time. So, it's just kind of, home is just home. I'll come off the road and that's where my home was. And that's where I would kind of decompress and live regular life.
And so does your wife travel a lot for her work, or does she end up in the same?
She's in the same station. Yeah. She's at the anchor desk. So, so she doesn't travel too much. She's not necessarily like a correspondent. So when she travels, it's usually just because she's off and she'll come see me and visit me on the road or take time off to be on tour.
That's a way for when you're really busy, a way for you all to have some time together. So you'll meet up.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Wayne Blanchard, It's a
Yeah.
friend of mine, and he originally suggested that I talk with you, and he had
Yes.
a few questions.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, he wanted to know how you felt, and this kind of goes back to my asking about the different artists that you play with and how things came about or what it was like. He wants to know, how did you feel emotionally, deeper than just elated, when you got the Fleetwood Mac gig? He's wondering if it was emotional, deeper than just elated, getting the Fleetwood Mac gig, and what did you do that day? And like, did you take out Miss Arthur, for dinner to celebrate? Did you start practicing?
I don't remember what I did. I know I was elated.
Uh,
It was surreal actually,
uh-huh.
because I had even kind of put it out there in the universe like that. Because for me, it's the Fleetwood Mac gig. It was Lenny Castro's gig. Lenny was the percussionist on the tour preceding the one I did,
Uh-huh.
and so I never thought I would ever get the gig. I had done a gig with Stevie Nicks a few years prior to my first Fleetwood Mac gig. Um, I was on tour with Lionel Richie,
Mm-hmm.
which I did the Whitney tour, jumped straight onto Lionel Richie, worked with Lionel for about 3 years. And one of Lionel's tour managers works with Fleetwood Mac, works with Stevie Nicks. He suggested me for a one-off gig with Stevie.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I learned her music, liked it. It's great. But I was there because I was subbing for Lenny Castro on that
Uh-huh.
gig as well. So all that to say, I put it out there in the universe. I was like, well, one day I would love to do a gig like Fleetwood Mac. I know I would never get that gig because that's Lenny's gig.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up working with Lionel in Hawaii, and the tour manager invited Stevie down because she happened to be visiting Hawaii at the same time that we were playing this corporate gig. She invited Mick Fleetwood down. So I ended up meeting Mick and Stevie, seeing Stevie again. And Mick and I hit it off, and we just talked after the show backstage. We were talking drums and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And little did I know that I was actually being auditioned for the gig, and that Lenny wasn't going to be doing that particular tour. And so we
The
finished.
audition was getting to know him a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And it was kind of a probation audition, meaning that like I would still do, once I quote unquote got the gig, I would do a month of rehearsals with the band, and then they had a corporate show where they did a small short set list to play for the corporate sponsors of the tour.
mm-hmm.
And so that entire first month we rehearsed just for that corporate show. And then so at that show was when I was to find out if I was going to stay on and for the
Okay.
remainder of tour rehearsals and then do the tour. So, and I kind of walked into that knowing that. So, but at the same time, I was just pinching myself even for that opportunity. I was like, I couldn't believe it. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
because I had just
And
gone just to do a one-off gig with Lionel, and it just happened that way. So,
that's so cool.
yeah.
Wayne also asked if you and Mick ever discussed percussion, not as it relates to the band, but just in general. And I'm also curious as it relates to the band.
Like hand percussion, like multi
Or
percussion.
yeah, I guess, or it's discuss how you would work together, or was it just you studying the parts and
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot of percussion parts in Fleetwood Mac.
mm,
I did a little bit of research before the one Lenny Castro played right before me. They did this, I think, Grammy Award winning DVD
mm-hmm.
or live concert called The Dance
Uh-huh.
in the 90s. And so I studied what Lenny did on that particular one, at least to get ideas as a springboard. And I was able to find some old footage of the percussionists before Lenny in the 1980s, an African percussionist named Asante.
Okay.
And I was able to kind of check out what he was playing, or at least instrumentation wise, on certain tunes, because a lot of songs, they don't have percussion, you know. And then once we got into rehearsals, then I would learn from Mick, like, oh, on this song, you can't really hear it in the mix, but actually I found a cardboard box in the corner of the studio, and I was playing, like a little train beat on that, on the song's Secondhand News. So I said, oh, okay. So then that let me know, well, I could play a 16th note groove on a cajon, and we'll just mic it up and kind of layer it into the mix. And so it'd be some of that stuff, like Mick would let me cue me into certain things that were really hard to hear in the mix that he played,
Okay.
he was hearing.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'm curious
Yeah.
about other also other people that you've played with where you just felt that. I mean, I'm sure you're grateful for every gig, but that
Yeah.
feeling of elation. But also Jeffrey Howard said, "This is such a great interview. I play hand percussion and always so insecure with my playing. It's so good to hear all this." Well,
Oh,
thanks
good.
for sharing that, Jeffrey. Yeah, it's this actually reminds me of something. This is something I talked with. Do you know Johnny Vodakovich, Taku?
I have never met him. I know exactly who he is. I've seen him from afar. I'm a big fan, of course. I'm very good friends with Stanton Moore.
Uh,
And so, Stan's very close with him, as are quite a lot of people in the New Orleans scene. And I know you interviewed Herlin Riley. I know Herlin as well. We played together with Dr. John.
Yeah, Herlin is like, I told him this story when I talked with him, seeing him in the Jazz Fest in New Orleans at probably like '96 or '97. I was in college, and I was at the jazz tent, and stay and see a band, and then I'd get a little closer, and I think the third band in was the Whitney Marsalis septet, I think,
Yeah.
and my mind was blown. I mean, it really influenced me, and so anyway, there's a quote that I want to read to you because I feel like it applies, and I read this to Johnny Vodakovich also. This is it. Your intent to deliver this thing of beauty has to be pure enough to overcome fear of what the response may be.
Mm.
I'm just curious what your impressions. I think what Jeffrey's comment just made me think of that because this is something that I tell I keep this quote because and I'm curious about yourself. You're constantly putting yourself out there, and I mean, I guess there needs to be a certain level of confidence, but I'm guessing there's times, it can waver. Just what are your thoughts on that quote?
I feel like, actually, read it one more time.
Sure. Your intent to deliver this thing of beauty has to be pure enough to overcome fear of what the response may be.
Yeah. I think that if you try to be in the moment as much as possible, then you won't have to have time to have fear
Mm-hmm.
or doubt yourself. It's really the self-doubt is what kind of gets in the way anyway with a connection to the music. So if you're going to try to be as true as you can, not only to the music that you're playing to, but also to why you started playing music and your love for music, and even just the sweat and most likely blood that you've put into your training, then that moment is should be the payoff. It shouldn't be you walking a tightrope.
Mm-hmm.
So um I full-heartedly agree with that. It's tough though, it's hard not to be in your own head. For me, I'm constantly battling being in my own head because there's so many parts that I'm covering. Like even on a tour like Fleetwood Mac, where I've done, well over 100 shows, even on that 101st show, I can't zone out or be quote unquote in the moment to the point where I'm not presetting for the next song.
Mm.
I'm literally playing a song and thinking about, after I play this tambourine for the last time, it has to go not where I picked it up from, but back over here in a space on my percussion table for me to create space to grab something else, because the next song I have a millisecond to start the next tune on this other instrument, so I'm constantly in that mode of choreography. So it is somewhat trying, for me, it's hard to be in the moment as well because I have so many things going on. So it's like when I'm able to coast, even if it's just for one chorus or one section of a song, I try to enjoy it as much as possible. Definitely.
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
quote, by the way, is Whitney Marsalis.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So for the Fleetwood Mac gig,
Yeah.
you're also are you using different electronics like triggering sounds and that sort of thing? Or are you all acoustic
I
sounds?
I was all acoustic on this past tour. The first tour I did have some electronics. I'm trying to think what it was. I had electronic pads. Yeah, I had them kind of there at my disposal for whatever I needed. With Stevie Nicks, I definitely used electronic pads on her hit song "Stand Back." Actually, it was my role to play some of those drum fills because she wanted the kind of '80s electronic Simmons sounds,
Uh-huh.
and so we would work it out that I would play the tom runs, And so in the first Fleetwood Mac tour, I did Stand Back was in the set list. So I had the pads for that song. And yeah, this and that, little things here and there, I would play some electronics.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you know when to play something verbatim and when not to?
Um, you never really know going right in, so you kind of see what works, and then usually in the rehearsal period, you find out. You're either told, or,
Communication.
yeah,
Uh
yeah, don't do this, do that, you know. And also, like, you'll try something, it just doesn't really work, when
yeah.
you listen back, so then
So then you
you're
just make a change because
yeah,
you could realize
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Well, I could ask you questions for hours, but we're starting to run out of time.
Okay.
Um, and I had a question and it just went out of my head. Let me just see what. I just want to answer. So Jeffrey also said that brought a ton of perspective. Thank you. Um,
But
and Saku also had a great answer to his question earlier. And Brenda says, Taku, you're always so sweet. And Lisa Joyce says, hi, Taku. So
right.
thank you everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate you taking the time, Taku.
Definitely.
It's it's really interesting. Your background and your experience is really varied, and so I'd like to just end on something. I feel like young musicians sometimes, and not necessarily just young musicians, overlook the human aspect of playing music, and just like in Nashville, like here, people, as soon as I moved here, people were, lots of people talking about the hang, just such an important part of your relationships. I'm just curious if you would mind just talking a little bit about, you know, how when you're around the same people a lot, or if there's disagreements, like what are some strategies that you use, or just what are some beliefs or morals that have really helped you over the years?
Over the years, definitely protect your energy, so
uh
that means once you do that, you end up gravitating towards people that you like to be around, that kind of help you cultivate your energy.
does that mean
um,
saying no to gigs, is that, or
yeah,
jobs?
yeah, definitely. It's tough with percussion because there's not like so many gigs, so
Mm.
like any gig that has percussion for me was like, oh, that'll probably be pretty fun, so I don't necessarily turn down tons of gigs,
Uh-huh.
major gigs, just because it's a great opportunity and learning experience. But as far as just like the hang and cultivating relationships and protecting yourself in terms of just staying positive, it's just basically just even on the road, just hanging out with like-minded people, as well as people that you think that you can learn something from.
Uh-huh.
Definitely, you know
Yeah.
definitely.
You try to find the people that are like-minded, and you've cultivated relationships with people that you really like and really want to be around, and
Oh,
and vice
definitely.
versa. Yeah.
Yeah, that may not even be musicians on the tour. That could be like production people and whatnot. So crew guys,
So
whatnot.
you'll hang with the people that you're relating to.
Definitely,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
That makes
definitely.
sense.
Everyone on the road is there to do their job, to bring the show, or to an experience to everybody, whether it's a lighting person or a sound engineer or whatnot. So I don't really look at it as like a big hierarchy. Everyone's there to do their part. So
Yeah.
in that sense, once you kind of have that attitude, like, then it's easy to gravitate towards people that are like-minded.
Were there any other gigs? One other question. What any other gigs that were that elation feeling? I mean, I'm sure there's probably more than one, but what are some other ones that gave that feeling?
I mean, there's positive aspects of every gig I've had. Definitely. I mean, being in Dr. John's last band was amazing. Just because it was kind of like, as much as I was around the Neville family and the Neville brothers, that I actually finally earned my spot into a storied New Orleans gig that had nothing to do. When I got the call, it wasn't because of my connections, and that people like Herlin Riley like really like took me in, and like we started playing tambourine together on time off, and
Yeah.
on breaks and whatnot. And so it
If
was
people haven't checked out his tambourine playing, check it
oh
out.
yeah,
Herlin Riley. Yeah.
definitely. So that's one. I don't know. There's so many. For one reason or another, I think every major tour I've done on my my resume has been a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I mean, for people tuning in, if you're not familiar with Taku, he's played really. I mean, it's amazing. The people like Aretha Franklin, Lady Gaga, Beyonce, Annie Lennox, Steven Tyler. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Herbie Hancock. It's you know, I'm sure a lot of people would love to, you know, to get a glimpse of those gigs and the inner workings of them. And it's really cool. So thank you so much for sharing some of your experience.
My pleasure.
And I really appreciate that. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. This is a semi-regular show, Clif Chats, and also these will be up on the Facebook page, Sound Rhythm Drumming Studio, Drumming School.